There have been 4 great policy errors, or 4 pretty sinister acts depending on your viewpoint, in the UK government's COVID response. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you will. I'm going to demonstrate 4 fundamental failings. First was the use of PCR testing. In the beginning, when politicians were blundering around looking for some way to react, and when the media and some of the more nervous population were screaming, "Something must be done!" you could understand politicians thinking, well, this is something, therefore we must do it. And that could have been fine for about a month. After that, they'd have had some time to think, and they should have realised the problems. For example, it's so costly. We seem to have completely abandoned financial sanity. It's past tense. You could pick up an infection 2 seconds after walking out of a testing centre. So I'm not really sure what they're supposed to prove. All an accurate negative test says is that in the past week, you probably didn't have it. And it's difficult to demonstrate any correlation at all between PCR tests and illnesses, especially if you amp them at a ludicrous 45 iterations as the NHS did. In what other area of life do we test people showing no evidence of what they're looking for? Imagine if the police saw you driving calmly and lawfully up the road. They stopped you and couldn't smell any alcohol. Despite that, they do a breathalyzer which returns a 0 result. Might you be a little put out if they dragged you off to a police station for a blood test? What if there was no evidence at all you were involved in a robbery and they smashed down your door looking for swag? Yet this is exactly what we're doing by encouraging healthy hypochondriacs to see if they were infected last week. Second great error. We seemingly focus on bizarre, expensive vaccines which did not complete their safety tests in preference for licensed off-patent generic drugs. Why could this be, I wonder? Well, it's been widely speculated, but let's just run through the evidence. Despite large numbers of people screaming from the rooftops about HCQ and other drugs and 1 or 2 non-pharmacological interventions like vitamin D or zinc as prophylactics, these approaches have been all but ignored by Western governments. When the studies were funded, they seemed to be set up to fail and discredit rather than get to the truth. When David Davis was questioning the health minister about the benefits of vitamin D, she couldn't even bring herself to recommend this pretty much entirely safe and well understood treatment. But when it came to the vax, government ministers, the TV, celebs, the whole modern virtue signalling train were falling over themselves to proclaim these the holy grail, the solution, the things that would unlock the economy. And if we didn't take them, we wanted grandma dead. The celebs I ignored as they were either paid off or virtue signalling. But as for the scientists, I wondered how they could make these claims. Well, of course they can't. The vax lacks any rigorous preclinical animal testing and suffered from a woefully short-term and small-scale set of clinical trials. Now, if we're in the middle of the new Black Death, where around a third of the population was dying, there might be a pragmatic kind of lesser of two evils argument for this to be made, but we're not. COVID has a 99.7% survival rate for young people, and it's closer to 99.997 for young people. Healthy young people are all but immune. The case for injecting an entire population with an improperly tested therapy, which has never been deployed en masse before, is not made. Many serious doctors and scientists have real concerns, but these are just waved away or dismissed. Remember, it's not the job of skeptics to prove the vaccine is dangerous or unnecessary. It is the job of proponents to prove it's safe, and they've absolutely failed to do so. When they said the vax was the passport to freedom, they meant that quite literally. You'd need a passport. Third, and maybe worst, was the destruction of parts of the economy. The vandalism of many small and medium-sized businesses is well known. We've seen an attack on the middle classes and anyone with ambition, independence or self-respect. The third horse of the apocalypse was representing famine, and that's strangely appropriate. What's worse is that while they were calmly trashing vast swathes of the private sector economy, they were living the lives of Riley themselves on guaranteed 6-figure salaries and enormous pension pots. If their own salaries had been cut to the levels of those they'd put into penury, the approach may have been quite different, and that's fair. Take the financial medicine you're prescribing. They also ignored all the warnings about mental health tragedies, increases in domestic violence, and the lack of daily physical exercise, and those warnings are now borne out. Fourth, the pale horse, stage managing press conferences with invited tame journalists to ensure they are not asked terse or difficult questions which would shoot their public reputations to pieces. It reminded me of Pravda in Soviet times. They never made it clear the increasing cases graphs were due to extra testing. Hard to know how this could be an error, not a lie. They were never questioned about the numerous peer-reviewed articles showing that lockdowns have no discernible health benefits and are hugely negative in economic terms. Nor did anyone ever wonder why, if you've had the coof, what's the point in wearing a mask or having a vax? Think this through. The point of any vax is to promote the creation of antibodies, which you would have anyway if you recover from the illness. Neither did we see any questions about the lack of immunologists on SAGE in early days. If you don't understand immunology properly, you'll never manage viral epidemics successfully. But there were behavioural psychologists and communists. This should have been questioned, but it wasn't. There is far too much respect for Whitty, Valence, Van Tau and all the rest. They're treated like the great Panjandrum, our saviours, rather than people running cover for a scientifically dubious drift into totalitarianism. Having a bunch of idiot arts graduates for journalists asking the questions is worse than useless. You need people in the room who will ask tough, difficult scientific questions, and that's why they're excluded. So, we have ridiculous testing, crazy vaccines being force-fed to whole populations, deliberate economic destruction which enriches billionaires, and a tame, compliant, docile media. Does anyone still think this is about a never isolated, and if you're under 65 and healthy, largely harmless virus? If you like this, please like, recommend, and subscribe.